silence. Great to see you all. Thank you for coming today. An industry for tomorrow's world. What's next for shipping after COP26? That's what we're here to talk about. My name's Nick Brown. I work for Bureau Veritas Marine and Offshore. Thank you, Chris, for your introduction. Just a very brief commentary from me before we get started. I think COP26 has been new to a lot of us in shipping, certainly been very new to me. And I think the presence of shipping here has demonstrated clear intent. How do we now translate that into action? Urgent action, starting right now. Participating in the Global Maritime Forum a few weeks ago and in subsequent events, including our own BV committee meetings, has highlighted a few key things for me. Carbon pricing, the need for it is certainly one. And I think we need to understand that while we're all on a journey with a common goal, inevitably some can or will move faster than others. And I think that includes regulators. While we talk earnestly about scaling initiatives for demonstration and pilots to make sure that opportunities and capacity in the water is net zero by 2030, that 5% of capacity in the water is net zero, we can now seize operational efficiencies and opportunities, and retrofitting, I think, is going to be one we're going to hear a lot more of. I know, Michael, you've talked about that, to capture significant improvements now. We need to ensure that shipping has more influence. The pandemic and our inability to protect our seafarers has demonstrated our weakness here. And there was positive news yesterday with Stuart's boss from ICS on a platform committing to a people-centered task force, starting work next month to address the need to support seafarers and to help support a just transition. I think talking about a just transition is also new language for shipping. And more generally, we need to ensure that shipping has a stronger voice. So we need to reboot our image, I think, to have influence in the future. Finally, the more we learn, and it's so strongly correlated with the last point about image and influence, the more we realize that we need to make sure we're getting the best talent into a modernizing industry. And it's great to see a diverse and relatively young audience here today that's left at the end of COP26, or nearly the end. So thank you for coming. Announcement yesterday at the Transport Theme Day here in Glasgow and in previous weeks are positive. So today I hope we're going to review where we stand and what's next. For Bureau Veritas as a classification society, and for all our stakeholders, for you, the climate challenge is defining everything we do now. We know that. At BV, we were the original Veritas, the first bureau for shipping. Our focus was initially on assessing assets for insurers. Safety, if related to the condition and safety of those assets, but safety for people did come later. And then, much later, a need to protect our seas from accidents and failures, put environmental protection to the fore. And this became increasingly important from the 1970s onwards, let's say. That evolution continues, and safety remains paramount, especially for classification. It's guiding everything we do. And we've heard a lot about that in the context, particularly of new rules for new fuels. We need to make sure those are safe. But additionally, today, I think we must see the ocean itself as a stakeholder in this transition. We know oceans are going to be key to decarbonization. So it's about more than just protecting them from accidents. It's now thinking about how we can properly protect and nurture life underwater. Sylvia Earle, I see in the newspapers, has been here in Glasgow talking about how we safeguard the blue heart of our planet. Many of us heard the diplomat Peter Thompson from Fiji, the UN's envoy for the oceans, saying something very similar in this room last Monday at Matters event. Are we listening carefully enough? Certainly at BV, we feel we're well placed to help. You know, we're more than a class society today, 78,000 people active across many value chains, supporting our stakeholders to meet society's needs. That cross-industry experience is now a growing part of what we're bringing to our ship and offshore classification and related services. Depending on how you measure it, we've got between 9,500 and 11,500 vessels in the water, more than any other class society. Many are increasingly sophisticated ships. The sophisticated ships we'll need, I think, in a world that is now decarbonizing and maybe moving away, as Danish Ship Finance was saying last week, from the big, heavy ships carrying ore and oil and thermal coal, for example, that logically, we will see less of those trades in a decarbonizing world. How fast that happens, I think, is obviously one of the key things we need to wait and see, but hopefully change at the same time. Twice in Glasgow, I've heard a quotation attributed to John Kennedy. I looked it up. It may not have been him originally, but it certainly reflected his outlook, I think, and it's very hard to argue with. One person can make a difference, and everyone should try. Maybe we can also say one shipping company, one ship owner, one bank, one class society, one supplier, one equipment manufacturer can make a difference. And every one of them, every one of us must try. So we know we have to act, we know it, so what exactly will we do next? Thank you, Malin, Chris, Eleanor, you're still here. I keep forgetting to pronounce the H in Eleanor. You've done an amazing thing here, I think, building this tent. People have come and to develop the Spotlight series, and you've had the energy to run it. I think you've got 31 events. I don't know what number we are now. 30. Okay, so you're nearly there. Thank you to you, and thank you for the International Futures Forum for agreeing to lead this workshop. Gran, Alan, Kath, there. They'll be guiding us through the day, and to Di Gilpin, for pushing me into this and for joining me. Thanks also to you. But right now I hand over to Michael Parker, shipping banker, back again where it all started for him in Glasgow, in his favorite tent, to point us in the right direction. Great to see you again, Michael. Thank you for coming today. And it's always good to start an event with the person on the front cover of the latest trade winds.
Thank you, Nick. And the truth is, as I said at the end of Maddie's event, the only reason I joined her event was to come to Glasgow, where I was born. And the only reason I'm here now is I originally booked a flight that was far too early, so I agreed to stay so I could get a later flight. But actually, it's not true, because yesterday I spent all day over there, and yesterday was Transport Day. And the question I was asked when we did a sort of pre-launch of the Green Corridors was how I felt sort of shipping had come out of COP. And I think the answer is we don't really know, but shipping was the only thing really on this list of transport events that the UK government had in the UK pavilion, where I think really there was significant progress, and I think that's very important. So the launch of the Clydebank Declaration, concurrent with the Green Corridors launched by the Getting to Zero Coalition, I think really is a significant step, because it's putting a lot of what we've talked about in the last year or so, and particularly in the last few months, actually into a real context. I'll come back to some of that, but in terms of just sort of free form, as Nick asked me just to talk about some of my impressions, when I joined City, I discovered that every initiative taken by senior management began with a C. And so we had the 3 Cs, the 5 Cs, the 6 Cs, and in the end you just forgot, as long as it was a C. And then our then CEO decided to change it to an I, so we had to relearn everything. Anyway, I've written down a lot of words beginning with C, and we've talked about collaboration. But now we're actually all getting together in a room. I've also sensed conflict. Good conflict, because actually we're talking about issues. But I do think the solutions are in the end going to be ones that are pragmatic. They're going to be multiple solutions. And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that there are inconvenient truths out there. For some people, LNG they don't like, for others, ammonia they don't like. But all these things are actually going to happen because billions of dollars is being invested in these things and will continue to be invested in these things until some of the clearer solutions come to pass. But equally, there are people investing in those cleaner solutions as we speak, but they will take a few years before they come to fruition. And that's really part of what the corridor is about. It's to stimulate the very, very significant demand, because already several projects have been announced in hydrogen production on those routes. So Australia, iron ore Australia to Japan, Asia to Europe container, two of the biggest trades in the world in maritime, and both, interestingly enough, different, because one is to the heart of the commodity trades and the other is to the heart of the consumer. But one of the things that I think sort of came out of the conversations yesterday, and Nick touched on it, is the importance of certification. So a lot of these people investing in these things, and you've seen and read people like Andrew Forrest of Fortescue, who is taking a lot of money and making things happen. In the end, they have to be certified, and the certification is important because the regulations are going to come later. We all know MEPC 77 is crucial, the follow-up to all these meetings in Glasgow, and I certainly feel that the IMO through Ketak Lim has got the message, and it's been a lot of effort, ICS and a lot of other people pushing the agenda. But we know that the arcane nature of decision-making in the IMO means that there isn't going to be any dramatic change overnight. But if they send a message about a zero commitment by 2050, that will be a very important guide to what will happen. So we have to wait for that, I suppose, that MEPC meeting to sort of really know where we're going. I think we have to sort of, someone said at a private event last night, we have to stop talking about decarbonisation. And I think that's an important point. We have to start talking about global warming. So the agreement on methane over there, shipping should take notice. The LNG is fine, and it'll be fine for longer if the methane slip is solved. The IMO has to get to grips with all greenhouse gases. And so all of us, like the Poseidon Principles, like the Sea Cargo Charter, like another thing that will be announced in a couple of weeks, we have to start looking at all greenhouse gases and talk about global warming, not just decarbonisation. I think the other thing that is apparent is the consumer, and this comes from the COSEV alliance that the Aspen Institute launched, and I had the opportunity to meet the person from IKEA running the sustainability in their supply chain and the sort of secretariat from the Aspen Institute. And there will be a lot more companies signing up to that. And I think the power of those companies, because they are also scared, if you like, of their own customers, is really going to start driving not just the container business, but actually the commodity business. Because in the end, those commodities go to be used by consumers, whether it is fuels, whether it is grain, whether it is iron ore, whatever. And so I think you should expect to see that building, and you should expect to see a wider group of people outside the industry, the normal industry channels, start to become experts on this industry. So get ready, and those of us who know a little bit more need to be firm in listening to them, but also explaining things. The point Nick made, I think, about biodiversity was a very good one. I heard Chris Grayling at an IMO event on Tuesday evening make this point. I was pleasantly surprised, actually. I hadn't really expected that from a Secretary of State for Transport, but it was a very important point that Nick made. The shipping industry is going to be held accountable for the state of the oceans where ships affect it. It's not just the pollution, it's going to be damage to the marine environment. I have a colleague who's a diver who's asked me to include in the Poseidon Principles the noise underwater. I'm not quite sure how banks can help regulate that, but the point she was making is, shipping creates all sorts of inconvenient harassment, if you like, for different people. We talk about, I just want to talk about aviation, funnily enough, because the only other event I went to in the pavilion, on the basis that cars, everyone knows what an electric vehicle is, the issue there is about infrastructure. It's about governments putting charging points in place. But I went to the aviation event because it's one of the other hard to abate sectors. And what was interesting was the admission by the chair of the Jet Zero Coalition, or whatever it's called, is they are the hardest to abate sector. And there's a realization, which probably wasn't there before COVID, but because of the economic consequences of COVID, that actually they may disappear. Aviation may disappear as an industry. Now, none of us can possibly think that because we fly everywhere. But they face that reality. It could be taxed out of existence if they don't make more progress. And those of us who used to fly 150 times a year, who've not been getting jet lag for 2 years, are we going to go back to what we're doing? If you paid for it out of your own pocket or you've got your own private jet, maybe you will. But I know that large corporate institutions are going to scrutinize their travel budgets because they've all saved huge amounts of money. And all that goes to show is that aviation is a voluntary activity. You don't have to do it, and Zoom and other things have made a lot of the reasons people flew around the place much less relevant. Now, I don't think we should be disparaging another industry, but equally what we should be doing is separating aviation and shipping. One of the problems with the UK government is it puts the two together in the DFT. The shipping minister is the aviation minister. To be fair, yesterday he was enthusiastic about both in the different meetings, though I detected slightly more personal enthusiasm in the aviation meeting because he's been to visit various things, and frankly because we don't have a Maersk left in this country. If we had a Maersk in this country, he'd probably be just as enthusiastic about shipping. But it's important when we are out there that we don't allow people to associate shipping and aviation. We should argue why shipping is an essential service to the global community, and people on board ships are essential workers, as we've seen. But they have sustainable aviation fuels. We know that there isn't enough bio sources at the moment in the world to do anything other than cover aviation. And they talk about offsets. We don't talk about offsets in shipping. We can argue about zero and net zero and the margin, but we don't talk about offsets in shipping. And I think one of the things that will become clearer as some of the definitions of these things come out from the accounting bodies, the other people working at the moment on standardizing definitions, is that we'll see even less excuse for anyone in shipping really to be using offsets other than temporarily and in very specific conditions. I think I'll just finish with what I think we've certainly applied in the Poseidon Principles, but I think is generally true, and you've heard a lot about the word transparency. Shipping, and this is where the big change is going to come. I said at the end of Maddie's conference, imagine ships with twice as many people on board. Half of them will be women. It'll be one voyage on, one voyage off, because it will be more technical. Have to be much cleaner, and that's all about cost. So not when I came into shipping, but a consequence of the shipping crisis of the mid-80s was everyone was cutting costs. All the offshore flags were created. Crews on ships went down from 25 to 12 or 14. It's going to change. They're going to have many more people at sea for shorter periods in order to attract people to sea and to get them paid better. And I think that's actually where the ICS and the ITF really have a common understanding of sort of some of the things that need to happen. And that will get paid for, and ship owners have to be told you will get paid for that through charging for what you're carrying. And the reason you'll get paid for that is because the consumer wants to see a cleaner, more diverse, as well as obviously efficient shipping industry. And that's where I think transparency actually will help shipping. The lack of transparency has held us back. Consistency, and that's important, that if you say one thing one day, you say the same thing the next day. Obviously, if there are technical reasons for change, that's fine. But I think it's important that we sort of establish more consistency. I'm accused by Tristan Smith of saying two things, one every sentence and the other every other sentence. The one every sentence is data, and data is getting better and better and better. And whether we like it or not, it's going to determine many, many things. And I think this, again, is something that shipping will benefit from, because it will show many of the more positive aspects of the role shipping plays in global trade. But we should embrace it. And there's technology coming out very soon that will do live streaming of all emissions. and that'll become public information, so any sort of hiding from it will disappear. And the consumer will see on what they buy, they'll have their E's and they'll have their calories, but they'll also have some sort of virtual signal of the emissions that were created in the manufacture and the emissions that were created in the transport of that. We can all contemplate that, but it's not that far away. And then credibility, and I think that's the last C I'll sort of finish on. The shipping industry has lacked credibility because it has not embraced regulation, though that's beginning to change. And it hasn't talked about the good story it actually does for the world and what it's done in terms of taking people out of poverty and through globalization, which is now a slightly dirty word, but globalization in the right way is a good thing. And shipping has been key to that. And I think what we should all be doing, we can argue about things, but just accept that things like LNG are here for several years. Ammonia will come, whether people like it or not. If you talk to all the shipyards, you talk to the engine manufacturers, it's coming. People have ordered ships that will be fueled by ammonia. But there is this huge effort going into hydrogen and other green and blue fuels that will change the carbon and other emissions. And it's those other emissions that I think shipping, particularly methane, have to think about. So I see those. When I came into the room, I saw these big pieces of paper, which Maddie made us work to last week. So I would try and keep my hands away from anything to do with that. But when you're doing that, please be optimistic and ambitious about the things that we think collectively we can get done. Because I think the pressure that is built is actually making a difference. And what is going to happen, and actually I talked to a colleague who I'd say is sort of more of a COP professional who was in Paris when the Paris COP happened. And he said over there, the private sector has now taken over. This is the first COP, where you have all those pavilions. It's like a trade show, each country, each industry. And that's a good thing, because now the private sector is driving this. The politicians will actually get left behind if they don't follow what we're doing. And I think that's a very good thing, because that's where the money, and get to the money in the end, the money will go where the private sector wants to invest it, where things will get a return, and regulation will have to catch up. So Bureau Veritas, thank you for inviting me to stay. Get on certifying, and as soon as you certify, so the money will go into all these things you've certified. So I look forward to a good day setting out a future with you, and an optimistic future where collaboration remains the most important thing, because with collaboration we get things done. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Michael. As Nick said, my name's Graham Lester. I'm from the International Futures Forum, and with my colleagues Alan Russell and Kath Cooney, we're going to be helping to manage the conversation today. We also have our poet in residence in the tent, Karen Gilbert. She'll be moving amongst us throughout the day in weaving poetry, which will be recited at the end of the session. So if you're curious about a strange character scribbling lines at your table, that's what's going on. What will go on in a moment is we're already deep into the substance of this conversation. I'm going to see if I can advance these slides, or just give a cue to Andy to move them on. We're already deep into the substance. We want to give you a chance to process that substance and have a conversation at your tables, and that is how we're going to run the conversation today, certainly for the morning. There'll be a number of speakers up here giving short presentations and introducing information into the room, but we're not going to have a Q&A kind of panel sessions. We want you to make sense of what's going on, and over lunch the IFF team will take the notes from your tables and try and get a collaborative picture of what sense you're making of the conversation. We're using the metaphor here of navigating a system transition. We have the shipping system. It is in a certain place at the moment. It needs to get to another place to be viable in the future. We need a set of navigational charts. What we've put on the table is a kind of really rough first cut at that navigational chart. So the first rule of navigation, know your starting position, determine that. So we know that shipping is a complex system. We know that it's riddled with uncertainty at the moment. How do we plan for the uncertainties ahead? And Michael's already introduced some of that into us. He's mentioned data. Data is improving. We know a lot about the present position. We also know that there's a sense of urgency, that you know, the last IPCC report said this is the decisive decade, and that message has been reiterated already by Nick and by Michael, and I'm sure a lot of times in every session you've been in the last 10 days. So we know that about the starting position. Those are some of the characteristics. We know something about the destination. Where are we headed? We're maybe 2050, maybe after, but we've got some sense of the direction. Although even there, zero carbon shipping, I take what Michael says, it's not just about carbon. And what counts as shipping? Do we count, does it just mean the shipping operations, or building, recycling, manufacturing, what gets shipped, etc., etc.? So even when we're talking about the destination, are we talking about system adaptation, you know, kind of shipping that's changed and adapted to the new circumstances, or shipping transformation, a kind of new shipping system in a new economy that is responding to new values or a shift in values in society? Questions. The UN climate change champions in developing their climate pathways talk about two phases in making the transition: the emergence phase and then the diffusion phase. And they say that shipping is in the emergence phase, where we're exploring. Again, as Michael said, lots of experiments and bold initiatives. Let's see where the money goes. Let's see what works. Let's see what's already committed. But moving in that direction towards our destination. So we're going to see experiment and bold initiative. Much more data, performance data. We need to know what's working. If we're going to reinvest and double down on what's working, we need to know whether it is. So performance against the destination goals, as well as other goals. And learning. Some technologies learn faster than others. We need a rapid learning cycle if we're going to make the decisive decade as urgent and effective as it needs to be. And then that next phase, which UNCCC calls diffusion, I call it scaling up. You know, from 2030 to 2040, what are we going to see there? Massive investment in something. Effectively, we're waiting in the emergent phase for the future system to appear. And then once it's appeared, we can then grow it, and it will manifest itself as our destination. Massive investment, a lot of that in infrastructure, land-based infrastructure, but also you know, adapting and modifying the existing fleet, and the challenge of stranded assets. Michael talked about a whole stranded industry, potentially in aviation, but there were some bits of infrastructure that maybe just don't fit the one that's emerging. So that's our kind of frame for a navigational chart. And hopefully this is what happens as a result. You know, the greenhouse gas emissions drop dramatically in the next decade and then get down to a safe level. So here's the simple version of that that's on the table. And it's also, for those who are following online, there's a button on the website that says morning group task that will get you into a digital version of this and allow you to participate in this same exercise. What we're looking for is, as you listen to the presentations that are already being made, we're looking for things that need to be on the chart. Things that are not maybe striking, maybe novel, particularly insightful or significant, that as we go through this journey, we're going to wish when we heard that today, we're going to wish we made a note of it, because here it is. So what needs to be on the chart? And we've got three kinds of things. We've got good ideas or innovations that will go on the blue post-it notes. We've got causes for concern. I'm sure there will be a few of those as well. And we've got signs of hope. So there's a kind of color coding in there with the blue, the pink, and the green post-its. There may be a few more signs of hope in the future. That's how we usually deal with hope. But there's hope all over the map. And so by the end of the morning session, we should have a chart that looks like that on each table. And then, as I say, we'll gather all of those in, synthesize that data, and in the afternoon, we'll concentrate on, okay, now we've got the chart, how do we make the journey? What are the actions and initiatives that come out of this conversation, particularly the ones that we haven't thought of before we had this collective, collaborative map. Alan.
So as Graham says, these are quite short conversations that we're going to have after each speaker has been on the stage. The first one's going to be slightly longer than the ones that follow, because we want to give you a chance to introduce yourselves to the people that you're going to be talking to this morning. We're sometimes surprised by how many words people can fit on a post-it note, and to make our lunchtime activity of synthesizing and gathering all these thoughts together, we ask that you do it in bullet point style rather than paragraph style, so 8 to 12 words per post-it note. Some people have got very, very small writing. Well, that's not what we're looking for just now, but enough to give us an anchor for the thoughts that you have, the insights that you have, the hopes, concerns, good ideas that you've that have occurred to you, so that we can capture them and weave them together and use them as an input for the afternoon discussions. We'll give you about 10 minutes, and then we'll bring the room to a kind of settled state where our attention's back up on the stage, and invite a series of speakers. For the other speakers we have in the morning, it's going to be a 5-minute conversation. It's a way for you to just voice your insights, voice your thoughts, and compare what you've heard with what other people have taken with what they've heard as we go along. And again, we'll follow the same format of the blue, red, and green post-it notes as we do that. Online participants, we'll check in and we'll see what's happening on there. So if you've not understood the instructions, we may redirect that, but hopefully it's clear enough for those using the online platform. Just click that button that says morning group task, and then you'll be into that. I don't think we missed anything else, so we'll give you 10 minutes to talk, introduce yourselves, get to know each other quickly, and then jot down a few ideas on the large chart that's on your tables or on the online portal. Thank you. Thank you very much for your patience with our process and your willingness to be constrained to 10 minutes on what was probably a good discussion. Certainly seeing from what was going on at the tables, there's a lot of good stuff coming up already. As I say, we're going to move quite quickly through this morning with 5 minutes of presentation and then 5 minutes to react to it, to talk and to jot down some ideas. I'm going to just hand back over to Nick to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you very much, Alan. Am I on mic? Yeah. So our first speaker is from NHS Oceans, Richard Hickson, not someone I normally see at shipping events, but fantastic to have you here, and he'll explain why he is a doctor who's interested in the oceans, is here today.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks so much for the invite, especially to Di, who reached out to me and persuaded me to come here. This is my 4th trip to COP, so I've been speaking twice in the Blue Zone and twice in this tent. Hopefully after I've kind of spoken for a few minutes, you'll understand why a critical care doctor in the middle of a pandemic took an interest in container shipping. I'm a big user of stuff. I'm a big consumer on critical care. We use a lot of pharmaceuticals. We use a lot of equipment, single-use plastics, about 3.5 kilos per patient per day. Oceans were always my interest ever since being a child, just a purely amateur interest. And I was very aware that the oceans gave us so much. They gave us food, transportation, livelihoods, pharmaceuticals, health and well-being. But as I became interested in sustainability within healthcare, what I realized was oceans were not featuring in human healthcare strategies at all. They just weren't being mentioned. And this started to worry me. I realized we needed to care about oceans, and I needed to figure out a way to get healthcare to care about them too. The climate crisis is a health crisis. I mean, as the climate gets worse, it threatens our health through direct trauma, adverse weather, drownings, new and existing infectious diseases, interruption to food supplies, all sorts of reasons that our health will deteriorate. But the climate crisis is also an oceanic crisis, as obviously we've heard about oceanic acidification. But healthcare also produces a vast amount of pollution through forever toxic chemicals, pharmaceutical pollution, the pharmaceutical metabolites, and microplastics, which will be passed into our water systems, into the oceans, and will affect the oceans just as much as the acidification. And as the oceans die, this threatens life on Earth. As they become increasingly toxic, then the atmosphere becomes toxic and the land becomes toxic. And I realized some of the predictions were just so scarily soon. You know, we were talking about decarbonisation by 2050, by 2045 for the NHS and its supply chains. But some of the predictions for the poisoning of the oceans, it was talking about the early 2040s with business as usual. And therefore, this is a massive threat to human health on a global scale. We're talking death in the millions and billions, not just, you know, mild changes to the health and well-being of individuals. But healthcare is also a villain. It produces 5% of global carbon output and huge amounts of pollution. The NHS alone, 600,000 tonnes of macro pollution every year. So to put the carbon in perspective, global healthcare produces twice as much as the shipping industry and more than shipping and aviation combined. So you guys are not the bad guys here. You know, human healthcare are the bad guys too, and we've got to get our own house in order. Human healthcare, however, because it produces an awful lot of carbon, it also generates its own work. So as it produces its carbon and waste, it fuels the climate crisis. This fuels the health climate crisis. This fuels our need to provide more healthcare. And we're in a positive feedback loop. And it just continues until it breaks. Either we break the loop or we cannot provide healthcare anymore, and it impacts upon each and every one of us and our loved ones. The good news is that healthcare are now realizing that the supply chains are critical. They're responsible for up to 2/3 of our carbon output, and 80% of our goods come in on container ships. So we have this fantastic link now between healthcare, container ships, oceans and oceanic health. We know that container ships have harms associated with them, but so does everything else. And it's fantastic to hear the conversations that have been going on this week with respects to decarbonisation. So we have actions now developing within human healthcare, within NHS England. We have 3 key documents: NHS Net Zero, which gives us a pathway to decarbonise the health service; Policy Procurement Note 620, which tells us that all our contracts have to involve or have to reference environmental protection and improvement; and the soon-to-be-published Evergreen Supplier Framework from NHS England, which will provide us with an access between providers, suppliers and healthcare to nudge the shipping industry through our considerable buying power to incrementally work towards lower emission ships and eventually completely zero emission, quiet, clean ships that are functioning on green corridors as described in the Clydebank Declaration. So this is the first step. We have our first shipping question in the Evergreen Supplier Framework, which is going to be trialled early 2022. And I'm working on that framework, and I fully intend for that to be expanded to include wider elements of oceanic health. And as we move on, I just want to see human healthcare stand up side by side with the Amazons and Apples of this world and declare that they wish to only use zero-emission ships by whatever date, and to hopefully use these green shipping routes as described in the Clydebank Declaration. And if human healthcare wins, our suppliers win, you guys win, everybody wins, and the planet wins. So for me, it's an absolute no-brainer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm sure you have many questions for Richard, and hopefully he'll be around for more of today, and you'll be able to grab him on the break later to ask questions. But just now, we're going to put you back to work just for a few minutes. Jot down your insights, hopes, ideas, concerns that you heard from what Richard has just spoken about. So just a few minutes at your tables, and then we'll bring you back together for the next speaker. Okay, thank you everyone. I had a question from the floor during that session. Will we be hearing back from the tables? In the interest of time, we won't be doing that, but we'll be doing a synthesis of all your inputs from all of the 6 or so presenters at lunchtime, and then we'll be kicking off the afternoon session by highlighting some of the themes that we saw emerging from it. And there'll be opportunities, lots of opportunities after lunch for you to contribute vocally and from us all to hear from you directly. So I'm going to hand back over to Nick to introduce the next speaker. Hopefully we'll get a hang of this process as we go through the morning. But any other questions that come up, anything that's not clear, just grab me at any point during the morning.
Thank you very much, Alan. So, just really quickly, Ingrid Sittenveld-Jegu from the Global Maritime Forum, who held a very big event in London a couple of weeks ago, bringing together industry leaders, is going to speak next. She's also representing the Getting to Zero Coalition, of which the GMF is a partner. And I think you had some news recently, so looking forward to hearing what you've got to say in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to be here. Yes, so my name is Ingrid. I'm with the Global Maritime Forum. And I'm also representing the Getting to Zero Coalition, which is a partnership between the Global Maritime Forum, the Friends of Ocean Action, and the World Economic Forum. The ambition of the Getting to Zero Coalition is to have commercially viable zero-emission vessels operating on deep seas from 2030. I've been invited here to speak today about the call to action for shipping decarbonization. The call to action was prepared by a task force of the Getting to Zero Coalition. The task force started working on developing this task force during the spring. And it was launched during the UN General Assembly in conjunction with the UN General Assembly in September, and delivered to the COP presidency 2 weeks ago at the summit, the Global Maritime Forum that Nick just mentioned. So the reason why we wanted to develop the call to action is because the coalition saw that the initial target by the IMO, so to reduce emissions by 50% by 2050, that was really a key decision back in 2018, and it has enabled a lot of progress, but things have evolved since. We've heard earlier today about, the urgency of the climate crisis, which is the reason why we're all here in Glasgow. But there's also been a lot of technological progress, industry mobilization. Governments have raised their ambitions when it comes to climate mitigation more generally. So we strongly felt that it's really time to step up ambition for the shipping sector as well. So the key messages of the call to action are for governments to commit to full decarbonization of shipping by 2050. And to support industrial scale emission shipping projects, so through national action. So this is something that governments can do one by one or in collaboration. And then finally to deliver policy measures that will make zero emission shipping the default choice by 2030. And this includes a meaningful carbon levy or meaningful market-based measure. At today's count, we have 209 signatories to the call to action from the entire maritime value chain. So ship owners and operators represent 52% of global operated capacity, 74% almost of cruise shipping's total passenger capacity. We have 7 out of the 10 largest ports in Europe. And the signatories are headquartered in 34 different nations of the world, but obviously the nature of shipping is global. And 56 of the signatories are involved with establishing zero emission infrastructure and producing zero emission fuels. The call is still open for more signatories, so if anyone in this room who hasn't yet signed up, please let me know, and we'd be happy to add you to the list. what I think makes the call to action really powerful is that it's not only a call on governments to do something, but it's also a manifestation by the signatories of what they are already doing. So all the signatories have submitted company-specific climate actions, and many of them have also communicated company-specific climate targets. So as many as 82 signatories have committed to full decarbonization by 2050, and that's actually in the absence of this policy framework that we are looking for. So I wanted to give some insights into the company-specific commitments to action as well, and they are all compiled in a report. You can find it on our website, and it's really interesting reading. So, I mean, first of all, a lot of research development needs to take place. So to develop and test zero-emission vessels and fuels, and also on the energy side and on the retrofit side, as we just heard earlier today. So in the report, 168 actions to this end have been reported. A logical next step is, of course, to commission the zero-emission vessels or zero-emission capable vessels. And 59 actions have been communicated to that end. So I think that's quite impressive that already now we have 59 actions, and that includes many more vessels, because one action is often more than one vessel. Then looking at the energy side, so 31 different actions include production of zero-emission fuels. And obviously, in order to access the fuels, the infrastructure needs to be adapted. And 31 actions have also been communicated on zero-emission bunkering infrastructure. And then on the other end, you have the demand side. So the customers and the willingness to buy the zero-emission fuels. Again, 70 actions indicate the willingness to use zero-emission fuels. And there's 37 actions about procuring zero-emission shipping services. And I'm sure you all heard about the COZEV launch the other day. That's really an important manifestation of that as well. So a lot of numbers, but I just wanted to show that this is not just empty words, but it's actually a real action taking place by the industry. But what difference does it make? So I think that the call to action is an important impetus to policy development, alongside many other announcements that we've heard over the past few weeks. So there's the COZEV announcement, the call by the ICS for a net zero target by 2050. So a lot of industry mobilization. So what has the response been? I think that many of us, we've tried to follow the flurry of announcements and declarations and so on happening at the COP. And when it comes to this specific area, there was a declaration led by Denmark and a few others, which was signed by 14 countries, so echoing the call for full decarbonization of the shipping sector by 2050. There was the Dhaka Glasgow declaration, which was signed by more than 50 climate vulnerable forum countries, also stressing the need for shipping to align with science and the 1.5 trajectory, and to impose a global carbon levy while ensuring that no one is left behind, so really addressing the issue of justice and equity. And we also saw the launch of the Clydebank Declaration yesterday, which is also a very concrete development. So I think that as we head towards the MEPC, which is the big deliverable for us, or the big milestone, I think that we've really done a great job together to show that the sector is ambitious and already taking action, and also that the transition can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Again, at your tables, adding more post-it notes to the same charts, just to capture some of your hopes and concerns about what you've just heard. We'll give you just a few minutes and then we'll bring up the next speaker. Thank you.
Mic on? Yeah, I'm on now. Hello again. So our next 5-minute speaker is Stuart Neal from the International Chamber of Shipping. He's had a busy week, a very big event at the weekend. And I think he's going home tonight. We've got one more short job. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Nick. And good morning, everyone. So, Michael, you said that shipping was new to COP, and COP was kind of new to shipping. Unfortunately, I'm a decade into this, and Although the sort of gap of a pandemic does remind you forget how bloody awfully tiring these things are, whether we're doing an event or not. So I'll start with a piece of advice that when I was working in the olden days, which we got from Christiana Figueres when we were working with Christiana ahead of Paris. COP is not important. What is important is the day-to-day engagement with governments that we all do before, after, and what follows through. And that's where ICS has sort of been thinking about our approach. And obviously we have a global regulator, and we're very lucky as an unusual industry to have a global regulator. And, you know, and I've come from the energy sector, and some of you may know. The energy sector would scream to have a global regulator because of the confusion and the problems that energy transition has created. So, you know, I know we sometimes get seen as, you know, slow because of the regulator's slow, but let's cherish that because it is powerful if we get it right. So we kind of started, as we highlighted the other day, with this 3-point plan a couple of years ago now. And it started with the revision of the STCW, and that's the basic training of crew. Because if you don't get the people right, you can have the best bits of tech in the world and it won't work. So we need to have that review. So in 2019 that was approved, but that's kind of stalled, so we need to keep pushing. And you know, the announcement that was reflected this morning and we did yesterday was again trying to keep that momentum up, because if we fail the people, we create inequity. Then we came up and got the industry behind a research and development fund. Now, you know, there's lots of great research going on, but if you actually look at the numbers, and the IEA did the numbers, in 2017 there was 2.7 billion research and development into clean shipping. 2019 it was down to 1.6 billion. And that's a trend because, you know, and we heard on Saturday, no one knows where they're going, so people are retrenching. So that was an attempt, 2-point attempt, one to get some money in the game and then match fund and keep going, but also it's a de-risking mechanism for governments because it gets them across a line to think about a mechanism of some description. And then, as we've heard, we've called for a carbon price signal. And again, that's a much more difficult political game. I've been in this game before Paris, and the discussions about whether there's a global carbon price, whether we get regional carbon prices that then retrofit themselves into each other, and nothing happened. And you know, we see where we're at. So that's politically a really, really difficult game, is getting governments to agree to a carbon price. Now, I think shipping's actually got a really good opportunity and could actually lead the world, but we need to get people to cross a line, cross a threshold. So, you know, just the $2 per ton for R&D isn't going to change the world. It's not going to change anyone who's got a checkbook around this table to do anything, but it helps politically get through, and then you cross the threshold. So I think that's what we created this 3-point plan. But what we need to be very careful is, as a relatively naive sector, is that we don't get unintended consequences for ourselves. And I think that's what's been good, and William just mentioned it. We are talking across the piece now, so hearing health, we're part of a much more global ecosystem. You know, we heard at our event on Saturday of the Chilean minister, the great plans that they've got to produce hydrogen. They haven't actually talked to any ship owners to think, how are we going to move this stuff to the markets in wherever? And we you know, it takes a few years to produce a ship and get it classified by Bureau Veritas and ... So I think we need to be actively having that conversation in the global energy transition. And industry is not a charity. So we need to create the business models, and we need to be realistic. We have to fly kites, but we also have to make sure that those kites come back to Earth and continue rather than crashing and burning. So one of the other things that, you know, and it was referenced, you know, that we have had an awful lot of transition in the industry. You know, when I came in 2019, you know, the industry wasn't in this place. But we have done an awful lot of consultation with our members, and our members, just so you don't know, ICS, for some of you aren't in shipping, we're the sort of trade body represented with national associations across the world. roughly 80% of ship owners throughout the world. So our board went through a process of consultation about what that future piece was. And you're right, the ambition of 50% by 2050, you know, it's a stretch target anyway, but it's not. And we had a historic board meeting where we came together and said, we actually want to increase the ambition. And, you know, and we got very progressive and also not so progressive people, and we are a broad church, as all of us are. So I think that's a really important step, that the industry is changing. But as we've heard, we need regulation and we need a level playing field, because we don't want to drive we all know the industry is not perfect, and there are bottom feeders or people that aren't so good, which will create a and in a cost optimized environment, they could grow and be, so we have to move carefully. So I think that's a message, but I think we pass the baton to policymakers now, because policy matters. Policy really matters for our industry, as in any industry. And if we don't recognize that and keep pushing that with governments to come together to empower the IMO and empower others to make decisions, not just announcements, but look behind the announcements, because there's been an awful lot of announcements this week, and there's an awful lot of nothing. And going back to Christiana's point, don't listen to COP. See where the money flows are. So that's, you know, Michael's job every day, right? See where the money flows are. And then, you know, just think about this. Remember, for us in the UK, last month we had a bit of an oil crisis, and the government that's making announcements to do this, that, and the other, we're also paying a company to produce CO2. So, you know, we need to be realistic, we need to be ambitious, and we need to keep the pressure on. And that's hopefully what I've learnt from this sector. It's a very analogous sector to all the other sectors, so we need to keep talking to others as well, and we need to be pushing for what we want, but we need to be realistic about what we want, so we don't get cooked in to problems. And there are some problems coming up on the horizon for us, which we haven't got time now in my 5 minutes, but absolutely we've got some significant issues coming on that are going to hit us, which some people have never experienced. So thank you, and good luck.
Thank you, Stuart. You should know what's coming next now. We're going to give you just a few minutes at your tables, just to add some things to your chart, and then we'll welcome up the next speaker. Thank you.
Hi again, everybody. Next up, Madda McLean from Zestas, who ran an amazing 3-day event last week, which Michael referenced, I think, in his speech. Great to see you, Madda. Over to you.
Thank you, and I would like to thank Beer Veritas, who are our platinum sponsors on that event. So thank you very much, Nick, for allowing that to happen. So yes, it feels like old news now, everything that happened. So much has happened since these 3 days. First, I'm going to say a little bit about the Zero Emission Ship Technology Association. I like to say, we're the sharp edge of the wedge, and we are a trade association that represents technologies that are zero emissions, true zero emissions at point of use on the vessel with minimal upstream impacts. And we only consider hydrogen to be a truly zero emission fuel. So we are, we ask people to put their zero goggles on. And when you put your zero goggles on, you clear the landscape from other obstructions, if you will. And you see that by combining the different zero emission technologies that are market ready now, we can achieve quite a lot in shipping with zero emission vessels. For example, we have marinized 3 megawatt hydrogen fuel cells. You add wind propulsion to that, suddenly you're able to move a considerable amount of cargo. I'm not going to go into numbers now. That's not what I'm here for. We don't have time for that. So I would like to say, as I say, we're the cutting edge of the wedge. I see that the industry is very much moving in this direction. This is where industry wants to go. And we would like to be the SAS, the SEAL forces, if you will, pushing that edge forward and creating space for the rest of the industry to come in behind us. So not pointing a finger at people who aren't moving more quickly, because we understand it takes a long time to bring this big vessel about to virer de bord. So we had 3 days. Day one was primarily, we looked at technologies. First, I'd like to say that we brought together people from, I was going to time myself and I haven't, so if somebody wants to go, Maddie, you've had your time, that's fair enough. I've got 2 minutes. Okay, so we brought people together from across the shipping sector, competitors, collaborators. Day one, we looked at technology. We found that indeed, as I said, we have the technology. Day two, we talked about finance. We saw that finance is really poised and ready to invest. And the thing is, you look at my little map here, you can see that the thing that's really holding us up is the regulation. And that we, as an association, feel that we need urgent COVID-level regulation to prevent us from reaching those tipping points. And definition of a tipping point, it's a place you don't come back from. When we start those feedback loops, begin, for example, releasing methane into the atmosphere, we're not coming back. When our global forests that should be creating oxygen begin to burn, we won't come back. We have within a decade to prevent us from hitting those tipping points. Just one other thing I'd like to mention is the fact that we had a speaker, Lydia Ngoge from the African MTCC, who talked about the South-North divide. And for us, very much as association, we believe no one should be left behind. We are as if we are on the Titanic. Ladies and gentlemen, we have hit the iceberg. We cannot continue on the same vessel. It is time to get on those safety boats. We must now, as an industry, create those safety boats that are going to pull us out of this urgency, out of this emergency. But also, unlike the Titanic, we will not lock the lower decks. No one will be left behind. We are creating a solution for all of the planet. So Zero Emission Ship Technology Association is also working closely with the MTCCs to bring the zero emission technologies to the global community. I think I've passed my 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. And thank you for keeping to time. That's great. We are just a few minutes behind, so as long as we can get our lunch on time, that'll be great. So we're going to keep the table discussions about 3 minutes from now on. So you've got about 3 minutes before we'll welcome the next speaker back up onto the stage. Thanks.
Can you hear me? Yes. So next up, break up your working for a bit for Diane Gilpin of Smart Green Shipping. We've said a bit about you already, Di. It's all yours. Thank you.
12:37. So, I've got 5 minutes, and some of those 5 minutes I'm going to have to say thank you to Nick and Alex and to BV, because this is such a fabulous event, and I'm really pleased to see that we are already getting stuck into collaboration, because that's what we really wanted to achieve here. So I don't know whether I can count those 2 minutes and have another couple back, but brevity, clarity, it's really, really important, because this is, as Maddie said, an emergency. But there's a thing about brevity and clarity that concerns me, and that is that we misconstrue an argument that's made in just 2 minutes or just 5 minutes. So how do we get the balance between the clarity and the brevity? And how do we build relationships? Because I think we can risk polarization. And so I've kind of become aware over the last fortnight there's a bit of polarization between what Greta's saying and what Mark Carney's saying. But I think if we listen to both of those arguments, there's a lot of common ground. And that's where we need to meet. And I have been reading Mark Carney's book because I think it's important to understand as much as we can. And a piece of it that struck me was some advice he gave about identify the biggest problem for your clients. Figure out how to solve that problem. Take on complex situations and make a plan. And then get on it and get on it fast. So the question I have is, we know we're in a climate emergency. We know we've got 8 years to start turning the to delivering 1.5. But does shipping have a plan for the short term? We've heard terrific announcements about alternative fuels around the Clydebank Declaration, and that's all absolutely marvellous, and we're really, really supportive of that. But it's not an emergency response. And over the last 2 weeks, I've heard quite a lot of things that really do relate to an emergency. I had a really good conversation with Natasha Brown from the IMO. Hull cleaning, 25% emission savings, like that, we can do it now. I've been talking to Harris a lot about revolutionary thinking about charter party agreements. How can we make operational decisions through that legal mechanism? And of course, we've had the International Windship Association Awards this morning, and there are some fantastically brilliant technical solutions there. And so we're all together here to think about diversity and collaboration, and that's what BV are pioneering, and it's really great to be part of that message. And I'm a huge, huge fan of collaboration. And Drax are here today, and I'm really pleased that you came, so thank you for that. We had a 2-year collaboration with Drax Demand Pool, collaboratively across the whole value chain. And we were able to use IFF's no blame approach and come up with a common goal, and between us we managed to come up with a solution that could save 20% of emissions right now within that group of organisations. This is transformative. We can do it this decade, and it buys time for the energy transition that we need to achieve rapidly. So can we do the 45% in the next 8 years? We must. It's not a can. We've got to do it. On Sunday, I managed to sneak a day off, and I was staying in Dumbarton, and I went for a run along the river, and I stopped, because of the time of year, by the memorial, the remembrance memorial, what do you call it, pillar thing in Dumbarton. And the legend on it was fidelity and fortitude. And so we're today remembering people who fell in the war, and these are the sorts of aspirational, personal attributes that they brought to the challenge. We need to dare to know the challenge that we have, and we can't mess around with ambition and enthusiasm. It's about determination. And I think we may all be in different ships, but we are all in the same storm, and we have to work together to get out of it. So thank you for collaboration. Thank you for coming today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Okay, again, just take a few minutes at your tables just to discuss what you've just heard and jot a few things down in your charts. And we're inching closer to lunch, so we'll gather all those up after the end of after the next speaker has spoken. Thank you.
Right, our final speaker to tell us how it all works, Alice Larkin. Thank you very much.
I think there's a slide. Oh, there we are. It's probably a bit complicated. So, and I'm very aware that I'm between you and lunch, so I won't speak for too long. I work at the University of Manchester. I work at the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, and we've focused for a long time on the decarbonisation agenda more generally, and also specifically also on shipping. And I just want to just to talk a little bit, just bring it back to some of the things we were saying at the start about the scale of the ambition and why the target is what it is, and also a note of caution about the fact that it might get harder depending on how well we do. And the reason for that is the concept of cumulative emissions. So we all hear about these targets in the future, 2030, 2050. And we sort of imagine, you know, when we're talking about new technologies, new fuels and so on, that, okay, what we need to do is we need to think about how do we get our money flowing in the right direction, the investment, the R&D and so on, in order that we have these solutions in the future. Well, that I think I heard the term waiting for these things to come along. We don't have time to wait because the emissions accumulate in the atmosphere. So this isn't about how, you know, sort of carrying along as we are at the moment with emissions not reducing, and then all of a sudden in 2030 having, you know, suddenly the solutions are there. It really matters the pathway that you're on. That's the main key point that I want to convey. And that's behind how the targets are set that are talked about, you know, for the whole energy system, and that will be coming out again of this Glasgow Agreement, if that's what it's called. But there's also a word of caution on that, because the analysis that goes into that from a climate science point of view makes scenarios about this global stock of cumulative greenhouse gas emissions. And that also assumes that there are negative emissions that can be taken out of our atmosphere in the future with new technologies, with land use change at a very large scale. Now that's quite a risky bet that these things are going to come off and going to work at the kind of scale that is hoped. And it's only by having these negative emission technologies that you can reduce your emissions at a sort of slower rate, if you like. If they don't come up, you'll have to reduce the emissions more quickly. And so the point I'm making really is that although we feel like we know what we need to do for shipping now, and some of the work that we've done, that we've published at the Tyndall Centre, and the researcher behind that is Simon Bullock, who's just over there, looks at how what we need to do by 2030, by 2050 in terms of actually cutting emissions down to zero. But it also means we need to get them down by at least a third, probably more, in the next decade, or it's less than a decade now, as Diane was saying. So reiterating the point that Diane was making, it really matters absolutely what we do to emissions in this next decade, and that also matters for all other sectors. So if other sectors also don't cut their emissions in absolute terms, not just carbon intensity terms, then it means that the targets are just going to keep ramping up for the same level of temperature outcome that we're aiming at, because it's the temperature outcome that really matters. So we do need to get our act together across all sectors. Shipping is no different. There are lots of opportunities in terms of shipping and how we can reduce emissions, and I strongly support not joining aviation and shipping together in that same debate. I think they are incredibly different and they have very different options. But we do need to think about the committed emissions in the ships we've already got that are already sailing and will be sailing for the next decade. How do we reduce their emissions? Either through operational change, through blended fuels, through slow steaming, through all of the wind propulsion type of technologies that we could possibly retrofit in that time frame. And then how do we incentivize that? How does that actually happen? So that's my challenge is, okay, let's think about the new fuels and the new things that we're going to have in the future, but let's also say, how are we going to make absolute emission reductions in this next decade, and how can we actually come up with policies and plans to incentivize that in a meaningful way? Thank you.
Just take the last few minutes for your final table discussion of the morning, and then we'll gather you back together for one more thing before lunch.